Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Friday's Skore drop-in session, how to choose your first process to map. Now, I know a few names on here, you're well into your journey of mapping processes, but that's the little asterisk there, whereas how to choose your next process is always a good question to ask. And as you can imagine, we come across all sorts of organizations all the time. They might love processes. They might come to us knowing exactly where they want to start, what they want to map. But a lot of the time, they're sort of asking for guidance and the like. And I hope you haven't joined this morning expecting a silver bullet in terms of this is the one process you must go and map. As a lot of my sessions are, these are more about getting you to think about it, maybe even actually having a discussion on it. So have your chat windows at the ready on Zoom, because we're gonna have a little. I'm gonna ask for some feedback, some ideas, and ask for a couple of votes as we go through. For such a big topic, it's going to be quite a short presentation or quite a short session for the reasons I've just laid out. There's no silver bullet. It's more about those things you need to consider when you're looking at it. So there'll be plenty of time for questions around this topic, or if there's anything else you've been wanting to share, talk about, or any questions to the team, we'll have plenty of time for that as usual as well. Let's get started. So, how to choose your first process map will be quite a daunting prospect for people new to process mapping. No, you're not just Skore, but quite new to it. So we've got a couple of questions. Yeah. So should we start with a high level process or something lower level? That is a very, very common question. Yeah. So where do we start? What should it be? Should it be, you can see there's a little screenshot on the left. Should we look at the top level of our business, or something quite tactical down into something like the invoicing? Let me open up the chat window. I can see someone's already put a message in there. So do vote. And again, you can have a vote or some of the pros and cons of each. And David, you've got there. It does depend, definitely. So what we see the benefit in terms of mapping at the highest sort of levels. We recommend people start there if they're trying to identify the opportunities. Yeah, they know they might have an issue with a particular part of the business, or even might not even understand their business in that totality. So actually, that's a really good scenario of mapping at the higher level. Often when people come to us with a challenge, they know, they've got I've just picked out the invoicing process as an example here. They know they've got an issue in here. Then that's the benefit. It's really when they're looking for a quick win, they know the issues. Pick something lower level, and you can get hold of it, improve improve that process. Yeah, it depends. It depends. A lot of this is going to be it depends. As you can imagine. Yeah, but some of the pitfalls as well. Going too high, you can lose people. And again, jumping straight into the detail, it's got almost the reverse, obviously, of the benefits. You can miss a wider opportunity if you start to just focus down into the detail. Brilliant. Thanks for that. Scope, wide or narrow? Yeah. So how wide should the scope of the process be? Again, you don't have to put it depends in. Maybe some pros and cons of each would be quite interesting. So wide, should we include a wide group of stakeholders in our first process map, or should we focus on a smaller number? So obviously, if we're looking at wide, benefits are you're exposing it to a lot more people. You're getting that kind of wider viewpoints, even if it's just awareness of what's going on, especially depending on where you are in terms of that journey. But conversely, you've got a lot more people to manage. If you're running workshops, trying to get people, just the practicalities of getting people's time in there. Andy's just popped up and said narrow. If it's your first process, my advice, but again, it all depends, is to focus on a narrow group of people. It'll be a lot easier to manage. Also, it gives you a lot more focus. And one of the better things, especially again, if this is assuming this is your first process, getting those testimonials, getting those quotes from people is a lot easier if you've got a smaller number of people to then take out to the wider audience. What comments have we got in narrow, but just a little bit wider than you initially thought? Brilliant. Very insightful comment there from Colin. Definitely. Yeah, it's always it's always interesting if you're mapping a finance process, for example, try and involve perhaps one or two people where they're customers of that process, or they have inputs, outputs related to that process. Yeah, narrow to get focus and impact. Yeah, definitely, Paul. Very, very good. And Paul, David saying we tend to have a small focus group to start with to get, yeah, exactly. If it's first, first steps of it, I prefer, okay, depends on the situation, I prefer a smaller group of people, understand what works for your business, and then go out to the wider group. Excellent. Simple or complex? So, should we keep things simple in our first process, or should we delve into the complexities? James, right in there with a simple. So, simple, brilliant. Simple, but it depends on the audience. Thanks, Paul. Definitely, and that's exactly one of my notes. In terms of underlining, it does depend heavily on the audience. So, keeping things simple makes it very easy for everyone. Yeah, so you're not excluding people by focusing very much on a sort of very technical system process or something like that. But then it can also be seen as perhaps too simple sometimes. If you're mapping a first process, you want to have a problem that's big enough, or complex enough that it shows different aspects of what you're trying to achieve. Yeah, so you can keep it too simple, because then people can easily undermine and say, well, you're not actually delivering any value. We knew that. We could have done that on the whiteboard. Actually making it complex enough, but not overly complex. You can see quite contrasting. But then also, if you're talking to a very technical audience, you might be developing an app, for example, you do need an element of complexity. So it does come back to that. That it depends comment, what have you. And again, Craig saying ideally simple, exclamation mark. We as Skore will always err on the side of simplicity, because there's a huge power in that in terms of engaging people. But again, it goes back to that audience. Who are you looking at? Perfect. Final thoughts. So we said it depends. I mean, a lot of what we talk about in terms of when a customer's coming up new, they're working out what it is. Before process mapping, we say we should really get them to think about what are their objective or objectives. And we say their objectives, not just their personal objectives, but in terms of the team. If you define that, it doesn't have to take long. If you start to define that, a lot of the questions which we've been posing and talking about will be obvious. So if you're trying to define a process to understand what the opportunities are across a particular department, and its customers, then again you can kind of pick out the aspects around what the scope should be, who do we need to involve, what level of detail do we need to get to. In that example, you wouldn't need to get to a lot of detail, because it's just about identifying the opportunities. The process after that might be we need a narrow focus, a more complex process, because we're trying to define what we can automate. So again, define that objective or objectives for yourself and your audience, and then just start. It's that we've probably covered this in previous sessions, but don't overthink your first process. If you don't know where to start, and you can't define an objective, or you can't define it clearly enough, start somewhere. You can always, if you started too level, that would become quite obvious, and you can start to drill down into the detail, and vice versa. If you start to map a very focused process and realize it's too narrow, or you start to get comments about the wider, you can always get out. It's a lot easier to improve a process, to challenge a process, and to build from a process if you started. So our overarching advice in terms of when picking your first or next process is start with something. And if you're really unsure, you can't nail down what that next process needs to be, you can log into our process template library. That's always growing. That might give you some inspiration. If I just open it up, I'm just going to quickly show you some examples, pick out some of the best ones for this. you've got some very detailed, you've got some RPA accelerators, the business on a page examples, or the APQC one, great if you're the earlier in the session when we're saying about starting high level, looking for the opportunities, this gives you a good kind of starting point, inspiration. It was HR and the like. So do check out the library. The other area to look at is the community. Yeah, yes, we run these sessions. Yes, we've got lots of experience process mapping, but so is our community. There might be someone in there that's in the same industry, going through the same challenges, or has the same questions that you have that they've now answered. So reach out, ask the question. Yeah, what's worked, what hasn't worked. So yeah, as I preempted, there's no silver bullet. We're not saying pick this process and you're sure to succeed. Any